The Chicago skyline was my backdrop, the view from the 87th floor of the empire I built. Nexus Logistics. A Fortune 500 titan. My intercom buzzed, my assistant's voice crisp. "Mr. Reed, a Richard Sterling is here." Sterling. The man who'd looked me in the eye and said, "You're too timid for leadership, Sam." He fired me. Now his own company was crumbling, and he was in my lobby, begging for a buyout. Begging for my mercy. The irony was a perfectly aged whiskey, smooth and potent. The slow smile touched my lips. It was time. "Send him in," I commanded, my voice the calm, steady anchor of the leader he swore I could never be. The door opened, and a ghost walked in. He wore the ghost of a power suit, the expensive fabric hanging loose on a frame shrunken by failure. This wasn't the Richard Sterling I remembered. That man was a predator, broad-shouldered and booming, a titan in his corner office, the man who looked me in the eye and said, "You lack the killer instinct, Sam. You're a passenger, not a pilot." Now he stood before my desk, the vast expanse of polished mahogany a chasm between us. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the empire built by the unassertive man he'd discarded. He fidgeted with his tie, a nervous tic I'd never seen before. "Samuel," he finally managed, his voice a dry rasp, a shadow of its former authority. "Thank you for seeing me. I didn't stand. I didn't offer a hand. I simply let the silence stretch, watching him squirm. I let him feel the full weight of the 87 floors beneath him before I spoke, my voice quiet, devoid of all emotion, a surgeon's scalpel ready to make the first cut. "Sit down, Richard." It was a command, not an invitation. He sank into the leather chair, a man swallowed by his surroundings. As he opened his mouth to speak, the years dissolved, and I wasn't in my office anymore. I was back in his. 15 years ago. I was standing on the worn carpet of Sterling Logistics, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had spent a year of nights and weekends building it. The Helios initiative, I called it. A predictive logistics algorithm that could reroute global supply chains in real time based on weather patterns, political shifts, and market volatility. It was revolutionary. It was my masterpiece, the project that was supposed to earn me a promotion to director. I remember the boardroom, the polished table, the expectant faces of the board members. I had my presentation queued up, my notes trembling in my hand. Richard, my boss, was supposed to introduce me. Instead, he stood up, smiled his predatory smile, and began my presentation. He used my slides, my data, my words. He presented Helios as his own singular vision. I was frozen, a deer in the headlights of my own ambition. I just watched. Afterward, in his office, I finally found my voice. "Richard, that was my work." He barely looked up from signing a document. "Our work, Sam. I guided you. I provided the resources." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Besides, you saw the room. They needed confidence, conviction. You were fumbling with your papers before we even started." "But it was my idea," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. That's when he stood up and walked around the desk, his presence suffocating the small office. He looked down at me, a mixture of pity and contempt in his eyes. "Ideas are worthless without the will to execute them, to sell them. You couldn't even defend your own project in a meeting. You lack the killer instinct, Sam. You're a passenger, not a pilot." He paused, letting the verdict land. "You're a great analyst, a brilliant mind, but you're too timid for leadership. It's just not in you." 2 days later, my termination papers were on my desk. Redundancy, they called it. I was escorted out with a box of my personal effects, the Helios initiative already being hailed in trade magazines as Richard Sterling's brainchild. He built his reputation on the back of my genius, on the foundation of my silence. The memory evaporated and I was back in my chair on the 87th floor. The ghost in front of me had finished his pathetic opening plea about market downturns and unfortunate investments. He was looking at me, his eyes pleading, desperate for a lifeline. He had no idea he wasn't here to discuss a buyout. He was here for a reckoning. I let the silence hang for another 10 seconds, an eternity in his world, a moment of pure satisfaction in mine. Finally, I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the polished mahogany. "Your pitch is compelling, Richard. It has pathos, a touch of desperation, but it's based on a false premise." He frowned, confused. "What premise?" "That your company has any value left," I said, my voice flat. "Your Q3 projections are a fantasy. You've leveraged your assets to the breaking point, your credit line is frozen, and your 2 largest clients are about to terminate their contracts." His jaw slackened. "I know this because they called me last week. They're moving their business to Nexus." The blood drained from his face. "How?" "You built your entire empire on a single pillar," I continued, ignoring his question, my voice a relentless, low drumbeat. "A predictive logistics algorithm that gave you a 15-year head start on the competition, an initiative that was once called Helios." The name hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. A flicker of the old sterling arrogance sparked in his eyes, a cornered animal's last show of defiance. Helios was a company project. I led that team. It was a group effort. "Our work, Sam," I quoted, my voice a perfect chilling mimicry of his from that day in his office. "I guided you. I provided the resources." Those were your exact words, weren't they? I watched the recognition dawn, the brief flash of defiance dissolving into pure, unadulterated fear. "You didn't guide anything. You stole. You took my masterpiece, put your name on it, and threw me out like yesterday's trash." He started to bluster, a pathetic attempt to deny the undeniable, but I held up a single finger. The simple gesture silenced him instantly, holding more power than his loudest shout ever had. "You said I was a passenger, not a pilot. You were right. I wasn't the pilot of your company. Because you were flying a stolen plane, Richard, and now you've flown it straight into the ground." I leaned back, the leather of my chair sighing softly. The predator was gone, replaced by a CEO discussing a simple, brutal transaction. "So no, I will not be buying you out. A buyout implies there's something left to purchase." Hope, fragile and pathetic, flickered in his eyes. Then, what? A partnership? A cold smile touched my lips. "No, an acquisition, or, more accurately, a liquidation. I will acquire sterling logistics, tangible assets for $1, not a penny more. I will absorb your client lists, your routes, your remaining infrastructure. I will then strip it for parts and dissolve the brand name within 90 days. Sterling Logistics will cease to exist." He stared, aghast, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. That's erasure. My legacy?" "Your legacy is a lie," I cut in, my voice dropping to a near whisper, sharp as a shard of glass, "and I'm here to correct the record, which brings me to my condition." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "You will schedule a press conference. You will stand at a podium, and you will announce that due to your gross mismanagement and lack of foresight, the company has failed. You will then publicly hand the reins over to me to salvage what I can for your employees. You will take full, unequivocal responsibility for driving your own name into the dirt." His jaw worked, but no sound came out. He was trapped. Ruin on one side, absolute public humiliation on the other. Both paths led to his end. I stood, turning my back on him to face the vast window, the city sprawling beneath me like a conquered map. "You told me I lacked the killer instinct, Richard. You were wrong. I have it. I just learned to wait for the perfect moment to strike. You have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to accept my terms. After that, the offer is off the table and I'll simply watch you burn. Your choice." I didn't turn around. I let him stew in the silence, his reflection a warped, pathetic figure in the glass before me. I could hear his breathing, ragged and shallow, the sound of a man drowning in thin air. The seconds ticked by, each one a hammer blow against the crumbling facade of his pride. Finally, a choked sound escaped him. You can't." It wasn't a defiance, but a whimper. "This isn't business, Samuel. This is personal. This is cruelty." I turned from the window, my movements slow and deliberate. I met his gaze, my own expression, a placid, unyielding mask. There was no rage in me, no triumphant glee, only the serene calm of a debt being settled. "You're mistaken," I said, my voice level. "Cruelty is firing a man 2 days after stealing his life's work. Cruelty is building a legacy on a lie and leaving the true architect with nothing but a cardboard box and a severance check." I walked back toward my desk, not sitting but leaning against it, towering over him. "This," I said, gesturing vaguely to encompass the room, the company, the situation, "is a correction, a balancing of the scales." He shook his head, a desperate, pleading motion. "The employees, what about them? Hundreds of people depend on sterling logistics. You'll destroy their livelihoods to settle an old score." It was a pathetic gambit, trying to hide behind the very people his failure had doomed. "I've already accounted for them," I replied, my tone cutting off his hope at the knees. "The competent ones will be offered positions at Nexus. We're always looking for talent. The rest will be given generous severance packages, far more generous than the one you gave me." I paused, letting the final, brutal truth land. "Their livelihoods will be secure. It's only your name, your legacy that will be erased. No one will lose their job because of this, Richard, except you." That was the final blow. The last of his fight drained away, leaving an empty husk in the expensive leather chair. His shoulders slumped, his head bowed. The titan who had once dictated my future was now a broken old man, stripped bare by the quiet, unassertive analyst he had so carelessly discarded. He didn't argue, he didn't plead anymore. There was nothing left to say. He rose from the chair, his movements stiff and uncertain, like a man twice his age. He didn't look at me as he shuffled toward the door. He opened it, paused for a fraction of a second, and then was gone, the heavy door closing with a soft, final click. I stood alone in the silence, the echo of his ruin hanging in the air. I walked to the bar in the corner of my office, my hand steady as I poured a small measure of Macallan 25, the whiskey I'd thought of earlier. I didn't drink it in celebration, I drank it to mark an ending. The end of his story, and the true beginning of mine. The phone on my desk chimed, a soft, unobtrusive sound. My assistant, Clara. "Your next meeting is in 30 minutes, Mr. Reed. Shall I push it?" I swirled the amber liquid in my glass, watching the light refract through it. The warmth of the whiskey was a distant sensation. I felt no elation, no fiery thrill of victory. Only a profound, chilling sense of completion. A 15-year equation had finally been solved. "No, Clara," I said, my voice steady. "Keep it, but get me Sarah Jenkins and Mark Chen." "The Skunkworks room, 5 minutes." "Yes, sir." I placed the glass down, the fine crystal making a crisp click against the granite of the bar. The drink remained unfinished. This wasn't a moment for celebration. It was a moment for execution. The Skunkworks room was the opposite of my office. It had no view, no mahogany, no leather. It was a sterile white space dominated by a 360-degree smart wall, data streams and market analytics flowing across its surface in a silent, endless river. Sarah Jenkins, my COO, was already there, her tablet in hand, her expression one of focused impatience. She was the operational engine of Nexus, a woman who measured the world in efficiency and results. Beside her stood Mark Chen, my CTO. He was younger, a prodigy I'd scouted from MIT, a man who saw the world not as it was, but as a system of code that could be rewritten. They were the two people on Earth who understood the architecture of my ambition. "Close the door," I said, and the frosted glass slid shut, sealing us in. "The board is getting nervous about the European expansion numbers," Sarah began without preamble. "The Frankfurt hub is underperforming by, forget Frankfurt," I cut in. They both stopped, their attention snapping to me. I never dismissed a problem, no matter how small. Sterling Logistics is going under. Sarah raised an eyebrow. We knew it was coming. They've been bleeding for 2 quarters. Good riddance. We're not just watching it burn, I said. We're acquiring it. Mark blinked. Acquiring Sterling? Sam, with all due respect, their tech stack is a museum piece. Their fleet is aging. Their network is a mess. It's a liability, not an asset. The acquisition price is $1, I said. The silence that followed was heavy with confusion. Sarah's brow furrowed. $1? That's not an acquisition. It's a public execution. What's the catch? Why would Sterling agree to that? He has no choice, I said simply. And the catch is that we are dissolving the brand. We're absorbing their key personnel, their client contracts, and their entire operational history. As of tomorrow, Sterling Logistics will cease to exist. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She was the best COO in the business because she saw past the numbers and into the motive. This is personal, she stated, not as a question but as a fact. This is about him. I met her gaze. It started that way. I walked to the main wall, and with a flick of my wrist, pulled up a cascade of code. It was archaic, clunky, but undeniably elegant in its foundational logic. Do you recognize this, Mark? Mark leaned in, his eyes scanning the lines. A flicker of academic curiosity crossed his face. It's a logistics algorithm. Predictive. Early generation. The architecture is familiar, almost a precursor to the Nexus core. It's called Helios, I said, the name feeling strange on my tongue after so many years. It was the prototype, the foundation Sterling built his entire company on. For 15 years, he has run a slightly modified version of this original code. He milked it, but he never innovated. He never understood what he had. I swiped again, and a new dataset flooded the screen, billions upon billions of data points. Shipping manifests, weather delays, fuel consumption metrics, route corrections, customs holdups. An entire history of global commerce. Sterling's greatest failure was his lack of vision, I explained, my voice low and intense. But his one, accidental success was meticulous data collection. He logged everything. For 15 years, Helios has been creating a perfect, unbroken fossil record of every single move his company made. This is why we're buying him. The realization dawned on Mark's face first, his eyes widening in awe. My God, Sam, it's a training set, a perfect 15-year training set for our AI. Exactly, I confirmed. We feed this data, every mistake, every success, every variable he ever encountered, into the Nexus system. Our predictive models won't just be a step ahead of the competition, they'll be a generation ahead. We'll be able to predict supply chain disruptions 6 months out with 99% accuracy. We won't just be the biggest player, we will be the only game in town. Sarah stared at the wall, the cool, pragmatic operator replaced by someone witnessing a checkmate 10 moves in the making. You'll create a monopoly. I'll create certainty in a world of chaos, I corrected her, and I'll use the bones of my enemy's company to do it. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of the strategy settling in. This wasn't revenge. It was apex predation on a corporate scale. I turned to them, my voice shifting back to the calm, steady command they were used to. The deal is conditional. Sterling makes a public press announcement at 9 a.m. tomorrow. He'll confess to mismanagement and hand the company over to me. Sarah, I want your integration team on standby. Compile a list of every Sterling employee we want to keep. They'll get new contracts and a 20% signing bonus by noon tomorrow. Make it clear, we are saving them from a sinking ship, not raiding it. She nodded, already typing furiously on her tablet. Done. Mark, I said, turning to my CTO. The moment the papers are signed, I want his servers isolated. I want that data cloned, firewalled, and triple redundant before anyone at that company even has time to think about hitting a delete key. It's the single most valuable asset we will ever acquire. Guard it with your life. My team is ready, Mark said, his voice humming with excitement. We'll have it ingested and running diagnostics by end of day. Good, I said. Clara will forward you the details for the press conference. I want our PR team there. I want it live streamed on every financial network. Richard Sterling wanted a legacy. Tomorrow, the world will watch him bury it. They left, a whirlwind of purpose and action, leaving me alone in the silent, glowing room. The next morning, the conference room at Sterling Logistics headquarters felt like a morgue. A forest of microphones and cameras was pointed at an empty podium bearing the company's fading logo. I sat in the front row, flanked by Sarah and my legal team, an island of calm in a sea of buzzing journalists smelling blood in the water. I wasn't here as a victor. I was here as a witness. Richard Sterling entered from a side door, and a hush fell over the room. He didn't walk to the podium. He shuffled, a condemned man on his final mile. His suit was perfectly pressed, a last futile attempt to project an authority that had evaporated overnight. He looked out at the sea of faces, his gaze hollow, and for a fleeting second his eyes met mine. There was no hatred in them. Not anymore. There was only a vast, empty landscape of defeat. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified into a pathetic rasp by the microphones. "Good morning," he began, his voice thin and brittle. "I have called you here today to make an announcement regarding the future of Sterling Logistics." He gripped the sides of the podium, his knuckles white, reading from a statement he hadn't written. "Effective immediately, I will be stepping down as CEO." A wave of whispers and shutter clicks filled the room. Over the past several years, he continued, each word a stone he was forced to swallow, due to a series of strategic errors and my own gross mismanagement, this company has become financially untenable. He paused, his jaw working. "The failure of Sterling Logistics is my responsibility, and mine alone." He had said it, the words I had waited 15 years to hear, not in a private office but in the glaring, unforgiving light of public record. He spoke of handing over the company's assets to ensure the security of his employees, painting a desperate picture of a captain scuttling his own ship to save the crew. It was a narrative we had carefully crafted for him. "To that end," he said, his voice cracking, "I have reached an agreement with Nexus Logistics. Its CEO, Samuel Reed, has agreed to oversee the acquisition and ensure a stable transition for our staff and clients." He looked at me again, a silent, dead-eyed summons. "I would like to invite Mr. Reed to the stage." I stood and walked to the podium with a steady, measured pace. The cameras swiveled to follow me, their flashes like strobing interrogation lights. I didn't look at Richard. I looked at the press, at the world. He held out a pen and a single document on a clipboard. The $1 acquisition. Our hands didn't touch as I took it from him. I signed my name with a crisp, fluid motion, the ink a final, indelible sentence on his career. He turned and walked off the stage without another word, a ghost exiting his own haunting. He was no longer my concern. I adjusted the microphone, the slight movement commanding absolute silence. "Thank you, Richard," I began, my voice clear and strong, a stark contrast to his. "Today is not an ending, it is a new beginning. To the employees of Sterling Logistics, let me be clear, your jobs are secure, your talent is valued. Nexus is not here to tear this company down. We are here to build you up, to integrate you into a stronger, more dynamic future. We will honor your client contracts and we will invest in the infrastructure that has been neglected." I kept it brief, professional, devoid of triumph. I was the steady hand, the restorer of order. I wasn't just acquiring a company, I was acquiring a narrative. The story of the unassertive analyst was being permanently erased, replaced by the story of the benevolent titan, who saved hundreds of jobs from the incompetence of a failed leader. As I finished, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I didn't need to look. I knew who it was from. While the press swarmed with questions, I stepped back, letting my PR team take over. Sarah was at my side instantly. "The integration teams are moving in. We have their key personnel already signing provisional contracts." "Good," I said, my eyes scanning the room but seeing something else entirely. Seeing the fossil record, I glanced down at my phone. A single message from Mark Chen. 3 words. "We have it." The real acquisition was complete. The legacy Richard Sterling had built on my stolen work was now the fuel for my absolute dominance. He had confessed to mismanagement, but he would never know the true nature of his failure. It wasn't a lack of foresight or poor investments. It was that he stole a weapon he never truly understood how to use, and for 15 years, he had been unknowingly gathering the ammunition for his own execution. That wasn't revenge, it was natural justice. The scales were balanced. Back in my office, the sun was setting, painting the Chicago skyline in hues of bruised purple and dying orange. The adrenaline of the morning had faded, leaving behind a profound stillness. There was no champagne, no triumphant calls to the board. There was only the low hum of the city and the silence of a completed task. For years I had imagined this moment. I thought it would feel like a fire, a roaring inferno of vindication. Instead, it was like the closing of a heavy ledger. A debt had been paid, the numbers balanced. My private line chimed, a sound reserved for a select few. Clara's voice was hesitant. "Sir, it's Richard Sterling." He insisted. "I can tell him you're unavailable." "No," I said, surprised by my own calm. "Put him through." A click, then static. His voice was a ghost on the line, stripped of its bluster, its power, its very soul. It was just the voice of an old, tired man. "Why, Sam?" he whispered. The question hung in the air, pathetic and small. "All of this spectacle, after all these years, just to destroy me?" I looked out at the sprawling city below, at the thousands of lights blinking to life in the twilight. My lights, my city. I thought of the timid man he had fired, the man who couldn't defend his own work. I thought of the pilot I had become. "You're asking the wrong question, Richard," I said, my voice quiet, but clear as glass. "This was never about destroying you. It was about correcting a historical error. You were a bug in the code. I just debugged the system." There was a long silence on the other end, filled only by a faint, ragged breath. I could picture him, alone in some dark room, the world he had built now just a memory. "You said I was a passenger," I continued, not for his benefit, but for mine. "You were right. For a long time I was. But you taught me a valuable lesson, Richard. You taught me that the only thing worse than being a passenger is being a pilot flying a stolen plane." I heard a soft click as he hung up. I didn't hang up my own receiver. I just stood there, listening to the dial tone, the clean, empty sound of a finished conversation. The ghost was gone. The ledger was closed. The moral victory wasn't in his ruin. It was in the silence that followed. It was the sound of my future, finally, truly, beginning. What would you do if the very people who told you that you'd never succeed came back years later asking you for a job?